So I guess mostly people have joined in. So I'll start off with today's webinar. Again, I really welcome all of you for sparing some time in the Saturday afternoon for this webinar. So I'll give my introduction again for those of you who couldn't hear last time. My name is Shivam Bhardwaj. I'm a campus ambassador of BitGrid at IIT Bombay. I'm a third year undergraduate student there. And I'll be the host and speaker for today's webinar on fine tuning and interpreting machine learning models. So let's start. So I'll start off with telling a bit about BitGrid. So what is BitGrid? So we basically, if we describe ourselves in very short words, then we are an ecosystem of data scientists, by the data scientists, and for data scientists. So in short, we are a group of people who have a vision of bringing together students, data scientists, academia, and even corporations and organizations to bring them together to create something which we call as a democratic AI ecosystem. We have a vision to create a system wherein artificial intelligence and data science is open and available for all. For this, we do a lot of work. So recently, we created something called as a COVID-19 tracker, which had the feature of real-time sentiment analysis using the tweets from the Twitter feed. So, and it also gives you an idea about the kinds of tweet that people are doing. So as to get an idea if they're positive, negative, or neutral. And also it tells about the accurate information about the people affected throughout the world and the distribution. So you can head to covid.bitgrid.net to check this out. Along with this, we have several other platforms which we open up for a community to help them. One such thing is a job board. Now, as compared to the other normal whiteboard interviews, the job board is a much better platform. Herein, we actually evaluate your technical skills. It is great for seniors or a first-time hiring, and it has an easy resource access for candidates. And we keep it regularly updated, so you can definitely go and check it out on bitgrid.net/jobs. All right, so that's about it as regarding Bitgrid is concerned. If you have any details, we can take that up later as well. So without further delay, let's kickstart today's session. I've divided today's webinar into two parts. The first one is fine-tuning machine learning models, which I'm planning to complete in around 35 to 40 minutes. And the second one is interpreting machine learning models, which I'll probably complete in 20 to 25 minutes. All right. So moving onwards to the first part, fine-tuning machine learning models. Instead of the conventional way of starting with what it is, I like to start with why are we doing this, or what is the need of this? So in the last few webinars, we got a lot of questions similar to one which is mentioned here. Where all can data science or machine learning be used, or in which industries can we use this, or which are the areas in which it can be used effectively, and which are the areas in which it can't be used? To which our answers was that data science actually transcends a lot of these industries, and it can be used almost anywhere. The only thing is, so for this they asked, if so, why is it not being used at present? The only thing is, model accuracy is the one thing which prevents it from being used commercially. So if you make a machine learning model and that is not accurate, then actually it is not beneficial for anyone, and hence it is not used. But there is something called Industry 4.0, which you must have heard. Industry 4.0 is the next big industrial revolution in which all the industry, the machines, the corporations, and all the industrial machines are moving towards what is called as data-centric smart industries. We all know in industries, we have a lot of sensors which control all the machines. Now, with the enormous amounts of data that is being generated every day, we make models using these, improve their accuracy, and hence we can deploy machine learning models to better take care of these machines as well as increase or maximize our profits. All right. So till here, I think you will have some obvious questions in mind. Since all I was talking about was model accuracy, the first thing which you probably think is how much accuracy is good enough? Now that's an interesting question, but it is actually very subjective. Now I'm saying this is subjective because consider two industries. One, say a dental industry, wherein you put a machine learning model to get the details of the size of the teeth to create a denture. Now that is varying for every person, and even a difference of 1 millimeter in the predictions might be wrong. So the tolerance level in these kind of industries is very, very less. but consider something other, maybe like a railroad industry or a road industry in which 1 mm more thick roads would can easily be tolerated. So this is actually very subjective and depends on the industry which we are talking about. The other question which I think you'd probably be wondering about is very low error always good? Now here, I would like you to consider have a clear distinction between what is called as a training error and a prediction error. So a training error is so by training error, I mean the error that we get after training a model and using it on the training data itself. And prediction error is the error that we get after training the model on some new set of data. And now these largely depend on model complexities. So the next obvious question which you would be asking is what exactly is model complexity? So consider this graph right here. So as you can see, as you can see on the leftmost part, wherein the model complexity is very low, we have a significantly high prediction error, which is actually not very good. Consider the blue line, which actually shows the training samples or the training error. So when we have a model complexity which is very less, that is generally the very basic model that we deploy. Now for these, the training error itself is very high, and hence the testing error will obviously always be high. Now, as we move along this blue line, you will be obviously able to see that prediction error is going down. So with increasing model complexity, our prediction error is going down. So essentially, our model accuracy is improving, and this is essentially what we're looking for. But be careful here. I mean, this is the point which I wanted to elaborate on. The training sample is the one which you're actually feeding to the model for it to learn. And when you are using the same set of data again, the training error would obviously always decrease with increasing model complexity. However, the thing which we want to look at is the prediction error. Prediction error is the error which we encounter after giving the model a new set of data and actually checking the error between the actual predictions or between the predictions and the actual data. Now, as you can see from the red line, to an extent, when we increase the model complexity, it goes down, but then it again suddenly starts going up. Now, this is because something called as bias and variance, which are parts of the error. Instead of going into much more technicalities, I'll like to elaborate first on the model complexity and why is this behavior happening. So consider this illustration. On the leftmost part, as you'll be able to see, we have given this data, which is plotted on the graph using the blue dots. On the leftmost part, we create a very, very simple model. Now, complexity of the model is defined as how well it is able to capture the training data. For a very simple model, say a linear model in which we just have a line to show the trend of the data that it is decreasing. I mean, it very loosely fits the training data. If we improve the model complexity a bit and maybe use a quadratic model instead of a linear model, then we're able to capture the effect of the data better, much better. But say if we want that model perfectly captures the data perfectly captures the training data, we use a model which is very, very complex. And as you can see, it's actually crossing all the points. So if you can see the R2 score is basically a measure of the error that we encounter on the predictions. So when the linear model was trained on this data, and this is a training error. So a training error itself was very high. So the R2 score is very low. The general trend is as higher the R2 score, better is the model on the given data. The maximum value of R2 is 1. So as we increase the model complexity a bit, we can see that the R2 score in the middle one is 0.88, which is significantly higher than the first one. And if we see the third one, the R2 score is 1. That is, it is not giving any error on the training data. However, this is just the training curve or the blue line which we discussed. Coming to the red line, on the left side, if we see, suppose we have a new point which is close to the right end of the line. Now here, if it is much downward, then there'll obviously be an error. So it won't be able to capture that details effectively. So this is called as underfitting, because it is not even able to capture the training instances completely. On the other hand, if we come to right hand side, it perfectly captures the training data. However, it is not like that the data does not have any error and it will follow the same trend. So if the data slightly deviates from this trend, there'll be a large error again, and this is which is something called as overfitting. So in order to counter both underfitting and overfitting, we use a model which balances out simplicity and complexity. That is, it is both able to represent complex data or the training instances as well as keeping it general for the new data. So next, what we should look at is how we actually evaluate a model, or what are the error metrics for judging a model. The one thing which we saw in this one was the R2 score. However, I think that before that, you should have a fair idea of what are some standard types of models. Talking about supervised learning, it is the kind of learning in which we explicitly provide data to a model. It learns from that data and then gives predictions on the new set of data. Now, this kind of learning has broadly two kind of models. The first one being regression. Now, this is the kind of models wherein we have a lot of data scattered over the point, and essentially it is much like calculating a best slope or a best fit line towards these data. If it's a 2D data, if it's a 3D data, it's like finding the best fit curve onto it. And then for a new data, just finding the value of those on that line or a particular curve. The second part is a classification. So classification, we divide the data into two or more classes. So the first one, you can see we divide the data into two parts, the squares, the red squares and the green circles. Whereas in the second one, we can also have multi-class classification. So we divide it into parts. So this is the very, very broad types of models which are used in supervised learning models. Apart from these special kind of model which I wanted to discuss is a decision tree and a random forest model, as I will be utilizing these two when I'll be showing the code in the late part of this webinar. So for this, consider a problem wherein you are in your office, which is 5 kilometers away from your house. After working throughout the day, you're thinking of whether to just walk all the way to your home or take a bus. Now to finally come up to a conclusion, you ask yourself some questions. You first of all see, okay, how's the weather? If it's rainy, you definitely take the bus. You're not gonna walk all the way if it's raining. If there are clouds, you'd see, okay, am I hungry? If yes, then you can walk maybe because it's all right. I mean, you can, okay, yeah. So you can just go back and definitely eat there. And if you're not hungry, then you can take a bus. So, and if it's sunny, and how much time it will take to reach your house? If more than 30 minutes, then you can take a walk, or less than 30 minutes, you can take the bus. So, I mean, definitely, more and more such decisions can be taken on your data to finally come up to a conclusion. This is exactly what is the kind of decision tree model, wherein you keep on dividing the data based on some characteristics and divide it into two or more classes until you finally reach this structure, which has a lot of branches as well as nodes. Moving over to a forest. What about a forest? As the name suggests, an agglomerate of various trees together make up a forest. So when you have multiple such trees with multiple branches, multiple varying of depths, and then you take the average of all those predictions to finally give an output value, that is called as a forest. Now here I'd like to introduce a term. It's actually a technical jargon, but it will be very helpful later. It's something called as hyperparameters. So we know what our parameters are. So parameters, if we say a function has some parameters, what we essentially mean is there are some variables or some numbers on which the function depends. If we change those numbers, the value of the function changes or the behavior of those function changes. So hyperparameters are similar. So if we say we have some parameters for a model, we essentially want to say that we have some parameters or the things on which our current machine learning model is dependent. Moving on to hyperparameters are the ones which we can actually tune manually from our side. So model parameters have two parts, one which are basically set implicitly and the ones which we set explicitly. The ones which we have to set are called hyperparameters. So in a random forest model, the depth of this tree, the number of such branches, the final number of leaves that we want to have, or all the parameters that you can check, you can change. So these are called hyperparameters. All right. So I think we fairly have a good idea about the basic models and the random forest model. So we're good to go looking at some error metrics. So error metrics are very important to judge a model. All right. I see some new participants joining in. So hi everyone, I'm Shubham. I'm the campus ambassador for BitCrit at IIT Bombay. Till now, I've just told a bit basic about why we are actually looking at fine tuning the model and what till now I've just discussed basic 2-3 types of models, and right now I'm on the error matrix. All right, continuing back. So there are a lot of error metrics which can be used depending on the type of model or the type of data we have. The first one, which is the most basic one, is called classification accuracy. It is nothing but the ratio of number of correct predictions to the number of incorrect to the total number of predictions made. So it's just like a probability thing. The next one is called as mean absolute error. So it is so the first one was actually it is used in classification models. Mean absolute error is done mostly in case of regression models. So it is the average absolute difference between a prediction and the true value, and the formula for which it is given here. The next one, which is very, very important, is a mean squared error. So it is the average squared difference between the prediction and the true value. The formula for the same is given here. And I would like to mention that this is definitely not an exhaustive list, and there are a lot of other metrics as well, which we can use as per the context of the problem, like the R2 score, which we just saw in the second last slide. Confusion matrices, which gives us a sense of false positives, true positives, etc. So having done with that, you'd probably be thinking, all right, Shubham, now we have a fair idea of what it is and why do we do it, but still, how do we do it? Which somebody also asked in the beginning. So we finally look at how we improve the accuracy of our model and predictions. So, all right, we have some more people coming in. So, hi everyone. Till now, I've just done some basics about why we are doing it and the basics of models and some error metrics. And this is the main portion of the first half. So, I'm starting off with how we actually improve the accuracy of our models. So, this is also not an exhaustive list, but these are the most important ones which are used in day-to-day life as well as in corporations. So, the first one is adding more data. Now, this is the gold standard. Till the time you don't have enough data, however complex model you make, however number of tweaks you do into your model, you can never be at par, probably never be at par with someone who has more data than you. So adding more data is the gold standard way of improving your model accuracy. The next one is feature selection. So if some of you who have been a part of the previous webinars, we talked about something called as a correlation matrix and heat map last time. So you can definitely look at those. All right, Yep. So Bharat, we will be sharing the recording at the end. Don't worry about it. So I was coming back. Feature selection is basically selecting the important features out of the data. So consider that you have some machine which has a lot of sensors, maybe like a motor. It has a lot of sensors like voltage, current, power, heat, temperature, RPM, a lot of them. And you finally need to make a prediction about maybe the electricity consumption. That is the target variable, and these are the features. So feature selection is essentially just selecting out those features which are important. Now, mind you, this for this, a lot of domain knowledge is very, very helpful. Consider that you have data, say for voting data. So now, as you know, that 18 plus are those who are allowed to vote. If you apply this domain knowledge to the data, you can drastically improve your model accuracy. However, there are other methods to do this as well, which I'll show in a moment. The next one is hyperparameter optimization. So as I said, there are a lot of parameters in models which we have to manually tune. So hyperparameter optimization essentially means tweaking your model perfectly so that it gives the best accuracy for the current problem or the current data at hand. Next up is cross validation. So okay, I'll use an illustration for this. So I hope you're able to see the image here. So as you can see, the current horizontal line of all the green and red beads, that represents all the data that we have. And the general rule of thumb is that we take some amount of data as a training data and the rest as a testing data. So cross validation is nothing but dividing all your data into training data as well as testing data. So once you train your model, you further test it on some other data to check how well it is performing. And this can be done multiple times. So if it's done one time, then it's just called one-fold cross validation. And it can also be done multiple times. So it is very important to note here that the amount of test data remains the same. However, the choice of test data and training data can vary. So k-fold cross validation is a very, very important thing to improve your model accuracy, in which different different test data and training data are taken. Different training and test data are taken so as to improve our model accuracy. So it continuously trains our model on different sets of data, checks it, and then updates the parameter as and when required. All right. So,
Shubham, sorry to interrupt, but I have a question here.
Sure.
Yeah, so in the diagram, we can see that you are changing the test data, right? Because that is the part which is coming inside the box.
Sure.
But where are you changing the training data?
So okay, I'll just go back to the image. Yeah, are you able to see that?
Yeah.
All right. So essentially consider that we have 1,000 samples of the data, and we basically divide the training, all the data into, say, in the ratio 1:10. So we take 900 samples as training data and 100 samples as the testing data. So as you said about the shuffling, we have an option. I mean, there's an option in the test train split in which we can shuffle these data. So it's not like we just take the first 100 sets as a testing data and the other 900 as a training data. So if we just switch on, just toggle the shuffle switch to on, then it'll just take training data randomly out of those instances. So it's not even like they have to be contiguous. It can maybe take all the third elements or all the fourth elements in this such a way. So having this randomization actually improves the model accuracy because it is not overfitting. It's actually generalizing the model.
Yeah, sure, I understand. The only thing which I wanted to confirm is everything which is outside the box becomes part of training data in this example.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So if you have any other questions, you can definitely shoot up in the chats. All right. So moving back to the presentation. Yeah. So hyperparameter optimization and cross-validation are mostly used together. However, they can be used independently as well. The next important thing, which was taken up last time as well by Pranav, is feature engineering. Now, feature engineering is a great topic in itself, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Later. So, feature engineering is essentially maybe scaling down the data or passing the data into another function to get some other data and then using it as the training data. So, I'll talk about it later, so don't get confused. And the final one is using ensemble models. So as the name suggests, ensemble models means using multiple models training on the same training data, and then finally averaging out all their scores and then giving the predictions. Now using such kind of a method actually reduces the bias in each of the models. So consider that some of your models may be overfitting the data or some of them may be underfitting the data. So using multiple models actually helps us cope with this problem and gives much better results. So at this point, I have a Colab notebook along with me. So I'll share that right now. Just a second. I'll share the link of that in the chat section so you can also open it up. Just take a minute to share that. All right, hope you have the link. So Abhimanyu has a question: is hyperparameter optimization done mainly through hit and trial, or there is a method to do it? So I'll be showing this as part of this tutorial in the Google Colab notebook. So for those who are relatively new to the field of data science, you have so this model of writing code and individually executing it blockwise is something which is a part of native of Jupyter notebooks. However, Google provides an online resource which is similar to Jupyter notebook, which is called as Google Colab. So you can definitely go there and execute your code, and it is very helpful to even deploy your deep learning models. If it comes later. So I'll go step by step and explain all the parts. So I've already compiled this because some portions of these actually take a whole lot of time, sometimes even more than training the model. So I'll just go line by line and explain these. I already have the outputs in front of me. So first of all, we import the standard packages. By now, I'm sure most of you would be familiar with it, but I'll just go over it. So NumPy is the package which actually handles the mathematical as well as matrix calculations. Pandas is the data frame or the data handling package, and Matplotlib as well as Seaborn are the plotting libraries. So these are basically the standard packages we import. Second up, we actually get the data from a standard data set. So for those of you who don't know, there is a package called sklearn, which has a lot of standard data sets in it. So these data sets are taken up, I mean, day in and day out, and using multiple research to actually benchmark the scores of their models. So we'll be using something which is known as the Boston housing pricing data. So this is actually a data of a lot of houses and a lot of other features. The housing prices, as well as the features on which that price depends from in the city of Boston. So the first line, it actually creates an instance of that data, and then the second line, it actually loads that data into the Boston dataset variable. Now we can take the Boston features into a data frame using this line, and the columns are obviously a part of it as well. So I think most of you would know, but I mean, if we just do data frame dot head, then it shows the top 5 values. All right, I think it's someone, but can you please keep your mic on mute so that other people don't have a problem with it? Thank you. So when we see the head, so we get the top 5 values. So this basically gives us an idea of how the values are, what kind of values are we dealing with. So all of these features, if we want, we can actually get a description of it as well. But for now, I won't be discussing that. Otherwise, I mean, because I'll be doing this process without having domain knowledge, so that can be generalized as well. So once we have this data, we can also get the target into a data frame using this data. And once we see the head of it, we can see the price of these houses, the corresponding houses, in thousands of dollars. So the data frame dot shape, which actually gives us the shape of this matrix. So 506 cross 13 actually means that we have 506 samples or inputs, and we have 13 features for each input. All right. So next up, we'll be preparing data and the model for training. So as I said, I'll be using a random forest model for this. All right. So in the sklearn package, we have a lot of features to actually minimize our tasks. So the first one is called a train test split. So it actually divides our data into the training and testing data itself. We have the ensemble package from which we can get the random forest regressor. So this is the random forest model, which actually employs regression technique, which we discussed earlier. And the third one is we are importing the mean squared error. We can also do it on our own, but I mean, it's better to minimize the code and use the already written feature which we have. So this line, so as we see, somebody was talking about the shuffle. So in the cross validation stuff. So once we turn this, toggle this shuffle to true, then it randomly takes on the training data and divides the other into the testing data. So it can be done effectively here as well. So essentially the train test splits has 4 parameters generally. The first one being the feature data frame, the second one being target data frame. The third one is the test size, which actually gives the fraction of the total data which we have to keep in the test one. So 0.2 essentially means that 20% of the total will be kept in the testing phase and the other will be kept to the training data frame. And we're not shuffling the data for this. So the first 80% of the data, so if we see the shapes here, then the first 404 columns are actually going into the train and the rest 102 are going into the test. So we're just dividing the data so that we can also have validation of our data. And this can also be used to first train the model and then predict on the testing phase to get predictions for which we have the actual values as well. All right. So as we know, as we can see from here, when we print the shape of Y train, it actually gives a 404 cross 1. That is, it is actually still considering itself as a data frame. However, whenever we input into a model, we need to input an array of just the values. So, I mean, this is a function in, when we just take out the values and ravel, so ravel is something which just converts all the values into a 1D sequence. So essentially it removes the second dimension. This is just a part of data preprocessing. All right. So, I mean, I'll take up the first one. As I said, adding more data is the gold standard of improving our accuracy. So I'll start off with using half of this data, half of the data set for our predictions. So we'll make up new data frames, X train and Y train, in which we'll just take half of the data. So we had 404 data points in the full data set. So we'll just take, half of it. So, till the 202th column, we'll take the data. Finally, here we are actually creating a model. So the random forest regressor, it's actually a function which creates a model in this model variable. And then finally, when we do model.fit and give it the data of half the data, that is X train new and Y train new, it trains the data upon it. And finally, we get the predictions on this using model.predict feature on the testing set. So we can get this and we calculate the error on these. So this is the mean squared error. That is the, the square of the error between the actual predictions, the data and the predictions. So we get the error as 34 here. So, this won't make much sense as of that till we do the other part. So just remember that we had the error when we just use half of the data set, that was 34, around 34. So when we increase the data, say double the data set and we use all of the data, create the same thing again, create a new model and calculate the error again, we see that the error using full data set is just 19. So we're almost like, it's almost a 40-45% drop, and that is humongous. So you can definitely see, the impact of data that we have. So definitely adding more data is the gold standard way of improving our accuracy. So we have an improvement of almost 14.633. And when we plot these data, so this is just a code for plotting in Matplotlib, which you would probably be knowing right now from the last two webinars. So when we plot the data, so the blue line in both actually shows the actual data, and the yellow one, the yellowish one, shows the predictions that we have. So the left part is half data set as versus the right, which has full data set predictions. So when you compare, you can definitely see that the yellow line is much more closer to the blue line in the second one. So you can see our predictions are much more accurate. That is much more closer to the actual values when we use more data. All right. Talking about the second one, which I said as feature selection, I also said that we sometimes need a lot of domain knowledge for this. However, in the last webinar, which was on the topic exploratory data analysis, we have something called as a correlation matrix. So it is nothing but it can see how well a particular feature depends on how well a target depends on a particular feature, or how how two or more features are correlated with each other. And then maybe we can drop, or just explicitly take some features to improve our accuracy. So in this case, let's first see the correlation matrix. So this part was definitely done last time, so I'll just quickly brush through it. So we just take all the data. All right, we have some more people entering in. So we just quickly take the data from the Boston features data frame, and we add the price segment, that is the target variable, in the same data frame as well, and calculate the correlation of the whole. So data.core essentially creates a correlation matrix of all the data, that all the features as well as the target that we have. And then we plot a heat map using the Seaborn library. So this is also, taken up last time, so I'll not go much into it. So as you can see, this is the correlation matrix of all the features versus the target. So as you can see from this line, so these are all the features, 13 features, and this is the price. So if we just look at the last column, we can see how much each of the how much price depends on each of the features. And we also have a metric here on the right of us. So it ranges from -1 to 1. So in this case, -0.8 to 1. So the value towards 1 indicates a strong positive correlation, and value towards negative of 1 indicates a strong negative correlation. And the value in the middle shows, very less or very weak correlation. So essentially, what we'll do is, we'll first see that which all variables are highly influencing the target variable. So how we'll do that is, from this last column, we'll just see which have the maximum values. So for this, we can just simply write a code, because right now we just have 13 features. We might as well have a million features when we move on to deep learning models as well. So this is just a code for just extracting the relevant features. So we first create this, the correlation matrix into its absolute value for just the price column. So that is the last column. We take all the absolute values, and we only select the features whose absolute correlation value is greater than 0.5, that it is actually significant. So when we print those, we see that we have 3 features, and definitely the price, it will have perfect correlation with itself. But we have 3 features which has a very strong correlation, which have a very strong influence on the target variable. Now, we can also have a case wherein one or more of these variables depends on each other. So for that, we again print a correlation matrix taking 2 of these features at a time. So from these, The first one has a correlation of 0.37. That's not much. But the second one between RM and LSTAT, it's minus 0.61. That's also a strong correlation. So we'll just drop it. So for the case of feature selection, let's just take two features. So if you were hearing correctly, we had 13 features which we took initially along with the data. Right now, we'll just take data, just two columns for feature selection. Having just two columns in the feature selection, we again train the model and predict the model and calculate the error. Now, this is the error using the full data set without the feature selection. That was 19.45. And just using just two features and predicting the model, we have an error of 17.40. So as you can see, it's not always that the more number of features that we have, the better it is. If we just select those features which are actually influencing the target, it's much, much better. And if we plot these and see our data, so on the left side, which you can see, these are the raw predictions using the full data set. And on the right, it's actually the optimized predictions after feature selection. So from the graphs also, you can compare that after feature selection, instead of 13 in the left, 13 features in the left part, using just two features on the right part also gives a much, much better prediction. So definitely just having more features is definitely not the best way forward. All right. And finally, coming to hyperparameter tuning to improve accuracy. A lot of people had doubts in this. I think they also, wrote on the chats. So first of all, okay. So as we know that we are currently using the random forest regressor, and I told there are a lot of features, some of which we can tune and some of which we can't. So all right, let's just get the list of current hyperparameters in place. So for this, we'll use a package which is called pprint. So it's actually stand for pretty print, and it'll basically help in printing these parameters in an order format. Otherwise, we had to write the code for it. So you can obviously use this package if it's already there for us. So we again create a model and train it on the data. And then finally, when we see the parameters in place, on fitting this training data, that means when this model is ready for predictions, these were the parameters which it automatically set on its own. So, these are a lot of features definitely. And so some of these, the most important ones are, say, maximum depth, which shows the maximum depth or the number of branches that you will go on keep creating till a level where, till a position where you have sufficient number of classes or sufficient number of leaves. There is also something called as number of estimators. This is actually, so as I said, a forest is nothing but an agglomerate of multiple number of trees. So this tells the number of trees that are there in the forest. So it's using 100 different trees and then estimating all of these outputs and then taking an average and giving it out back. So we have a lot of other such things. So as one said, the first and foremost, the naive approach of finding the best hyperparameter is, for example, we take all other hyperparameters same and just vary the number of estimators from say 10 to maybe 10,000, and we get a graph and we see where the error was minimum. So this is also an approach, but however, this is not an efficient approach and it will also take us a lot of time. So instead, what we create is something called as a hyperparameter search grid. So in this, we can actually tell, we can create a grid. Grid is nothing but it's mostly like a matrix in which we create all the values of the parameters which it should take, the range of it, and then it'll basically calculate all the permutations in it, and finally check. Okay, I think there's someone more joining in. All right. So we just calculate all the permutations, combinations, and then try using a new model and finally get which was the best model. So we have a randomized search CV function in the sklearn model selection package itself, which we can use. So here we can just create a list of all the values that we needed to perform. So say number of estimators, we want a list starting from 50 to 500 in the gaps of 10. Similarly, for other features like max depth, we want the maximum depth, the maximum number of levels in the tree to range from 10 to 110, say, starting ranging from 11. And we create the list of all such features, and then we create a random grid. So when we create the random grid and print it, we see something like this. So as you can see, for say bootstrap feature, it'll test both true and false. For the max depth feature, it'll test all these values. Or similarly, for the minimum sample split, it'll test all these values. So it'll create a matrix of all the permutations and combinations of these features, and then test the model using each of those. So let's move ahead with choosing the best hyperparameters. So for this, let's just create a random forest model, which we'll call RF this time. And we'll have a random search of parameters using threefold cross validation. So cross validation is essentially here so that, with not just with one output, you can say that the model is good. So when it actually tests it 3 more times, it's a much robust system. So we're just using it here. So we can anyways, change it to, say 4 or even 100, but that'll just affect the computation time. So we create an RF random, which is a randomized search CV. Basically, it's a randomized search grid on which we use cross validation, wherein we give the estimator as the random forest regressor. And the parameter distribution is the random grid, which we created. So it'll test all of the permutation and combination of all of these. The number of iterations is 100. That will it calculate the value for 100 times of each of them. It'll have a threefold cross validation. And then, the number of jobs, this is just for parallel computation in the backend. And then we fit the data of X-train and Y-train on this model. And finally, it takes a lot of time, and then it calculates the error with all of these. And then we can just directly get the best parameters. So these were the best parameters it found for the given data. So this is a much efficient way instead of calculating, just varying one feature and keeping all the others same. And I would highly recommend that you use this. So, and further, we take the best estimator out of those random models and then give, predict on X test using this model. And then when we get the error, we compare it without the hyperparameter optimization. So the error without hyperparameter optimization is essentially what we got when we use the full data set. And with hyperparameterization, we got an improvement of almost 2. So it is still better. All right, and even when you see the graph of it, the actual data using the full data set was this, and the optimized predictions after hyperparameter optimization was this. So it's definitely better. All right, and so I'll just head back to the presentation. Yeah, just a second. Yeah, so in the code, I showed how adding more data, feature selection, as well as a combination of hyperparameter optimization and cross validation helps us improve the accuracy. Now, ensemble models is actually, not very difficult, but it would be difficult for me to show during the time duration of this webinar. So I'll just talk on feature engineering now. So feature engineering is nothing but changing the data into a particular format so that it's easy for the model to interpret it. So on the left, consider this tangled, data. In this, you can see we have almost like two concentric circles. Inner one is circle, outer one is a disk. We have two classes of data which it needs to separate out. However, tackling with such a distribution of data, it's actually very difficult for simple models, and we need to use a much sophisticated model for this. So, but however, if this data is in the coordinate system, we can just create it into a polar system. So for those of you who might not be knowing, the coordinate system is the one which is just the Cartesian system, that is the XY coordinate system. And if we change it into a polar format, a polar coordinate system, that is the R and the theta system, starting with a center at this, we can just get the distribution of the same data into the right hand side, wherein we already have the division or the classification of data into two parts. So feature engineering actually plays a huge role if we know how to handle it. So I'll just do a small experiment and show it to you. So for this, I'll be using a website called as, I'll be using a website called as TensorFlow Playground. So TensorFlow Playground is actually a tool which is made available by Google so that we can actually understand neural networks better. Just to check, probably you're able to see this. Just give me a thumbs up or something in the chat if you're able to see the screen. So the current page which you see is actually the TensorFlow Playground. You can just Google it and you can reach it here. Okay. All right. Thank you, Abhimanyu, Ankita. All right. So, yeah. So what we have here is So we have a play which actually starts the runs or pause the system. We have epochs. So epochs basically are the number of iterations which the model performs, essentially, which is similar to loops, the for loops that we have in the code. All these features are definitely the advanced ones, so I'll just skip over this. So we can take up a problem type as classification or regression. So for this experiment, I'll just take a classification problem. Now the important part, the one thing which I wanted to show. On the left hand side, I'll just zoom in so that you're able to see it more clearly. So we have four kind of data sets. So here we can select what kind of data sets we want to use, what kind of features do we want, our model to distinguish, and how it affects the output. So consider we take the data set of the concentric circles which we just saw. All right, and we take the features in which all right, let's just take two features in which the model can distinguish between the features which are different horizontally as well as vertically. So if we use these features in a model and we see the output, I'll just run it. So as you can see here, it is not able to differentiate between all of these clearly. So essentially, all right, somebody is entering. So essentially, when you see what you see is, this is the data into two classes, but the shading is how the model differentiates into it, and you can definitely see that the model is not performing. It's performing very bad. So the training loss is 0.502. So essentially, half of the predictions are wrong. So this is definitely very bad. So now if we change the data, so when we do feature engineering, say we change the data into something of this sort. When we, so we have clearly two different sets of data which are distinguishable on the basis of their distance from the center. And then we use the same model again. You can see that if in just like 50 iterations, the model is able to do very, very good. And the training loss and the test loss both are like 0.001, which are actually great. So this is just, a small experiment to show how just changing, just simple feature engineering and using the same model can improve our model accuracy drastically. Like it varied from 0.5 to 0.001. That's almost like 5,000% increase or something. And so this is actually for like machine learning, deep learning model. But if I just increase a hidden layer model here, so we can consider, model ensemble method in which consider the first, these two, this is as a first model and this as a second model. So essentially what the system which I've created is, I've taken a model whose output is going into another model, and then it is actually predicting the final output. And again, if we take the concentric circle data using these two models and then see. So if you're able to see, after a while, it actually did well. And as you can see, the graph of the training loss and the testing loss are going down and down. And in a while, it'll actually, reach almost near the value wherein we had the initial one, that is 0.001. So even the ensemble method actually greatly helps us in improving the model accuracy. And you can definitely head on to this website to play around with this stuff and get an idea of this. So with that, the first part of my today's webinar is over, and I'll just take a 1 minute break, so that if there are any questions, you can definitely shoot them up in the chat. And after that, we'll start off with the second part, that is interpreting ML models. All right, we have some questions. So could you explain what the number of neurons signify here? So all right, that's actually for a deep learning model. So I won't venture into it. But if you compare it with a conventional machine learning model, consider that the first two features that we have on the left hand side was the first model, and the 4 neurons which we had on the right hand side was the second model. So essentially, neurons say that these are the number of features on which your model can distinguish upon. So on the left hand side, we just add a horizontal and a vertical separation of the data. So all right, we have some more. So Abhimanyu, we can talk about this later as well. Definitely, you can ping me. Yeah, coming back, Saish, the number of neurons which you can say that basically divides the data. So if I'll just take a moment and head back there. I'll show you. Right. So yeah, I hope you're able to see the screen. So if you see the first one, consider this as the first model, and on the right side as the second model, and consider them as an ensemble model. So here, I mean, we very clearly know what is this model doing. So it's essentially separating the model on basis of, I mean, a horizontal and a vertical plane. So if the data is separated along these lines, it can do very well. However, using a circular data, I mean, it is using another model which can maybe differentiate into all these diagonals. And it is because of these and a combination of these that's actually able to do well on even a circular set of data. So, I mean, that's the basic part. For Neuron, maybe you can ping me later and we can have a chat. So, yep, all right. If you guys have any question, I mean, just shoot. We'll probably just take up one or two questions and then start again with the further part. Sure, Saish, thank you. All right, doesn't look like anyone has any more questions. So I'll start off with the second part since we're already a bit late on time. So I'll start off with interpreting machine learning models. So interpreting machine learning models, as the name suggests, I mean, we're obviously interpreting how a machine learning model is able to give the output. I mean, why do we need it? All right, I think we have some more questions in the chat. How to ensure data leakage? Sanjeev, I am not sure if I got your question, but I mean, I'm sure I can take it up at the end. So yeah. So why is it actually important? So I'll use an example for this so that it becomes clear as to why this topic is actually important. So consider a problem wherein we are given a data in which we have several features about age, gender, occupation, about a lot of people. And the problem statement is, how do we know, how do we predict that a person likes computer games or not? So we just train a model, and when we see the output, we see that if it's a decision tree, it does something of this form. It first of all see if the age is less than 15 or not. If it is yes, then it will see if it's a male or not. If it's yes or no, it divides all the data into current paths, and the numbers which you can see at the bottom, that is +2, +0.1, and -1. Those are actually what are called as prediction scores. So what essentially this model or the decision tree model is doing is it is dividing the data into a number of segments so that it can reach at a best prediction score for a particular entity. So say there's a boy who's less than of the age of 15, he's most likely to play computer games. So this model essentially is the best for all the given training instances. However, consider a situation wherein, I mean, there's an older person, say Frank or Bob, who's like 40 or 45 years old. But however, he works as a computer game developer or he works as a video game mechanic. Now, he would also definitely like computer games. But this representation of the decision tree model, this is good for the overall population, but not definitely not for Frank or Bob or that particular training instance. So how do we actually know which factors are driving a particular prediction, either globally or locally? So globally here, I mean, globally is this, which corresponds to all the samples, and locally means for one particular sample. So we need to know how, I mean, both of these are handled. So in fact, there is a widespread notion that machine learning models are actually something like black box, which have output function based on some ML algorithm. They just take up a lot of training data, some new data, I mean, do some calculations and give a prediction. And a lot of these predictions exist. And even in a model, something called as a random forest regressor, even the predictions might vary every time we do. So industry or the industry leaders are still very, very skeptical about, I mean, this black box, which magically gives out some predictions. So, and a lot of people, I mean, in you also might be thinking that, I mean, it's the same thing. However, I beg to differ with all of you on this. So, I mean, there's a widespread notion that machine learning models are a black box. However, they are not. So I'll try to, I mean, explain this in, I mean, the few slides. So consider the most basic regression models. So regression models, we just have a group of data, and regression essentially means that we actually calculate a best fit line or a line which essentially models all of this data. So we can just have a simple line or a curve, maybe if we use a quadratic, quadratic fit, or I mean, if we have data in 3D, then we can have a surface on all those lines. And it's not, I mean, difficult to, predict what would be the slope of such a line if we know the data. And in fact, the slope of all such lines, or even the uh, slope of all such curves, that is not difficult to predict. In fact, we do have a formula for it. It might be a bit complicated, but it is definitely possible to understand this. Talking about a classification model, consider, I mean, this is a situation of you have a company and there are a lot of applications coming in for the post, especially right now in the COVID-19 situation, this would happen. So, I mean, it first divides the whole applications into three parts: the different type of job posts, then into the race categories, and then the salary categories, and then finally it distributes the, I mean, classifies the entire data into different sections and sends it to your particular verticals in your company. Now, even this is, I mean, fairly simple to understand. But what about the complicated models? How do we go about understanding complex models? That is the real problem. So, before actually moving on to the complex problems, let's start with a basic part of it. So, consider that we have a feature matrix X, wherein we have number of samples, which would be represented by the number of rows in the left matrix, and the number of features by the number of columns in the matrix. And you can have this target vector which has equal number of samples. So for this, let's say if we consider a case of linear regression. So as a lot of you might be knowing, what linear regression does is it actually takes up all the values of all these features multiplied by some coefficients or weights and gives a linear output of that. So in this function, in this expression f of all these features, this is the output of the model, is actually equal to some phi1 times x1 and so on till phi n times xn. So phi1 or phi1, phi2, these are actually called as the coefficients or weights, which are actually found out using the model. And these can be very easily printed out if we use a linear model. And x2, x1, x2, xn are the features that are input to the model. So if we just have a linear regression model, I mean, understanding how a particular prediction was made is actually not that difficult. So and if we want to see which feature had the maximum impact, we can just compare the value of these phi ones, that is these coefficients. Whichever coefficient had the maximum value would have had the maximum impact on a particular target. However, when we move on to more complicated models, all the data or all the problem can definitely not be modeled by just simple linear relations like these. So we can have a lot of like a random forest regressor wherein it uses multiple forests, maybe hundreds of such classification trees, and then gives a model. In those cases, it's really difficult to go about these. However, for one particular sample, please pay attention. This might be a bit mathematical here, but for a particular sample, that is one observation, this linear relation might still hold. So for one particular relation, we can definitely say, okay, which features multiplied by which coefficients gave one particular result. It might not be best for a global output, but it can definitely be all right for a single output. So that's not a difficult task. So in such a case, when we have these coefficients for a single output, those are called something called as Shapley values. So Shapley values, it's actually a mathematical robust system to find the importance of a certain feature, even though the model or the data might be complex. So, I want you to understand that these features, so when we have all these features just for one sample, we can have any such combinations of these weights. So consider that, okay, there's someone entering. All right, to those of you who are entering just right now, we have actually done with half of the webinar and we just started off with the second part. So, please be patient and we'll just go ahead. So yeah, as I was talking, in the case of a linear regression in one sample, consider that we have values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the output here was 5. So we can, it can even be like the first 4 coefficients are 0 and the last one be probably 1, and or the first coefficient might be 5 and the other be 0. So we can have a lot of these combinations possible. So how do we actually come to the conclusion that a particular coefficient is right for a particular classification? So for these, what we do is Shapley values, it calculates the average of all these outputs. So, after training a model, after giving it some data, it learns from it. And then when it's ready to predict, we give it all this, the testing data. and it actually gives us a prediction. So from all these predictions, we take the average of all these predictions and calculate something which is called as a base value, which is nothing but the average of all these predictions. Now, the task what Shapley value does is it calculates how from that average or the base value that the particular the particular observation is deviating from that, and how each of those features contributed in that deviation. So this might be looking intimidating at first, but I'll just explain it in a bit. So we have something which is called as a force plot, which essentially does this. So a force plot is nothing but it has a base value. So if you paid attention to the Boston housing prices data, these are actually the features of those, and this is one of those one of those observations. So for all the predictions, it calculated the average value as 22.34, and then using that for one particular instance, it saw that okay, PT ratio had value 15.3, LSTAT at 4.9, similarly age was 65.2 something, and using all of these for that particular observation, the actual model output was 24.41. So it actually tells how each of these, how do you reach the model output starting from the base value. Here the length of each arrow depicts the sharp value. So the larger the arrow, the stronger, the higher is the sharp value in magnitude, or the more important is that feature. So in this particular example, LSTAT was the most important feature, followed by RM, NOx, and so on. Also, the color shows the direction of the shift from the base value towards the model output. So when we started off, consider when we started off from the base value, all the features, RM, NOx, age, etc., it actually pushed down the base value even further from the model output. However, PT ratio and LSTAT moved it closer to the model output. So this is good, but only as far as we just have one observation at a time. And considering this for a whole set of data wherein we might have hundreds of data, it is a bit difficult. So we move on to something known as a summary plot. So summary plot is actually much better in terms of a force plot, because it actually shows three things. The first is so this also shows global importance. So on the left hand side we have all these feature names, and it shows in them in the decreasing order of importance. So LSTAT was the one which had the most impact globally on the values. The second thing which it shows is the sharp value, which is denoted by the x-axis. So this is the zero value. The farther it is from this mean value, the higher the sharp value. Also, it shows the feature value. Now, feature value is actually so as I said, we can have values like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The magnitude of those is actually called a feature value. So the reddish ones will actually have the absolute high feature value. So now it actually does a two-step job for us. First of all, it gives which features were globally the most important into pushing a particular value towards a target. Second up, it shows how were the sharp values varying according to the different features. So consider this LSTAT variable. So feature value low is represented by blue. So when the LSTAT feature value was low, even the sharp value was low. However, when the feature value increased, moved towards red, even the sharp value started to rise, although in the negative sense, but it started to rise. So it actually gives a two-way benefit. It not just tells which features were the most important globally, but also tells how those features itself changed. How the importance of those features changed as the feature value changed. So this is definitely, a notch above that. However, it still does not, do the job completely. So we have something called a decision plot. It actually is a mix of both the plots together. So here, when we see that, so at the bottom, you can see the central line is the base value or the average of all predictions. What we see is, we again see, all the values in the decreasing order. That is, RM was the most important in this particular observation. So we can see how, starting from the model value, how each of them contributed into its shift, either in the left or the right side, and it finally moved on towards a particular model output. We can do this not just for one observation, but for all the observations as well. And this is actually, tremendously important. Why is this tremendously important? Is because, see, first of all, for any particular observation, you can see which feature was the most important. So just pay attention to the list or the order of these features in both the images. They're actually different. So for the global feature importance is actually different from a local feature importance. That means globally, if LSTAT was the single most contributing factor, it was not the case in, this particular example. in this actually RM played the most effect. Also on the right image, if you can see, I mean, you can definitely see the feature values also. So this shows a trend, as in, so when you see that, so all the house values which had a low, I mean, sort of low target value, they also had a low LSTAT value. Also, all the house prices which actually went a lot of them up, it- this point, this point actually shows that DIS was the single most important feature for them. So decision plot is definitely, I mean, a way forward to understanding the model. So I'll just quickly open Google Colab notebook and I mean, code this along with you. So if you have any, if you guys have any laptop along with you, that's all right. Otherwise, I'll share the Colab notebook again, and you can, I mean, just go through it along with it. So I'll just take a minute to send the link of it again. Yeah. So, and I won't be deleting these files. So, I mean, you can definitely look at these later. I hope you are able to see the link. Yeah. So, for interpreting the ML models, I'll just resume my screen sharing. So, for interpreting these models, I've just put in some headings, which I'll do. So I'll first install the Sharp package, which we'll use. So as I said, there are something called as Sharply values, which can be calculated by a lot of packages like Lime, Sharp, etc. And there are a lot of even other packages and online tools like Google What If Tool, which can do that. But for the sake of today's tutorial, I use the Sharp package. I'll import the libraries, load data, train a random forest model, calculate its Sharp values, and see all the plots in order. So, yep, I'll start off. So anyone who has a laptop, I mean, please feel free to do it along with me. Yeah. So I'll start with installing the Sharp package. Notice an exclamation mark in the front. So in the Jupyter style format, we use an exclamation in the first line if we want to run a command on the, I mean, say, command prompt in Windows and in a terminal or a bash terminal in Linux. So this would install the Sharp package. Yeah. So once we're done with installing the Sharp package, we can import the libraries. So I'll use some libraries, basic libraries like NumPy. I'll use pandas for data manipulation, sorry, data frame manipulation. I'll import Sharp, definitely. I'll use matplotlib, pyplot feature. Okay. And yeah, that should be all right, I guess. So yeah, all right. So next up, we'll load the data. So as I said, we use the data from a standard data set. So we can just use sklearn.datasets, and we can again use the load Boston data. That's a standard data. And so, I mean, using a standard data has its own benefits because it does not have any missing values, and I mean, it's fairly reliable. So our models are actually correct. So I'll import random forest model, and I'll use a test train split feature to ease my task. Yep, that should be all right. All right. So let's just load the data. Maybe start off with loading the data. So load Boston creates an instance of the data and actually puts it in the Boston variable. So now if we see the Boston, I mean, data, we'll be able to see all this data. However, it's not structured. So we definitely need to put in a data frame. So let's just create a data frame, say data, which is equal, um, which has, sorry, so I'll create a data frame using Boston, and I'll give columns as Boston's feature names. Yep. Yeah. All right. So and we'll also put the price, that is the target variable, in this as well. So okay, I think there's something in the chat. Boston. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, we need to use Boston or data, and we'll use feature names in the columns, and we'll also create a target data. That will be a different data frame, which will be the target values, and the column name would be, let's say, price. All right. That looks good for now. So let's just see how both of these look. So we'll use data.head, and we'll use target data.head. Right. So yeah. So I mean, it looks better than last time, but definitely, I mean, if you use the print, then it looks bad. However, if we use just data.head, I mean, it's much better in terms of viewing. Right. Anyways, so let's start with dividing our data into training and testing data. So I will use the same 20% testing data for the sake of this example. And oops. Yeah, and I'll give data, target data, then test size I'll keep as 0.2, and I'll switch off the shuffle again. All right, looks good. Let's just see how the data is. All right, yeah, that looks all right. So let's just create and train a random forest model next. So let's create a model. Oops, yeah. So we'll create a random forest regressor. Let's use number of estimators, that is number of trees, as say 15 maybe, just for the sake, so that it doesn't run too long. And we'll fit the data. All right. And then let's just store the predictions also somewhere. So we'll predict those using the X test, that is the remaining 20% of the data. All right. Okay. Yeah. So we need to change this. So yeah, as I was saying, the values of travel part is done so that this error doesn't show up, because we need to pass a 1D array instead a column is passed. So I mean, this would do the job. Yeah. So now we move ahead with calculating the Sharpe values. So first of all, we first creating a Sharpe values, we need something called as an explainer. And something I mean, this explainer will finally give us the Sharpe values. So yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll first create an explainer. So please note that this explainer is actually dependent on the type of model that you're using. So since we used a random forest, which actually has a tree type model, we'll use a tree explainer. And here we need to give the model as well as the data which we use to, I mean, which we gave for the training. So then this explainer is set up, and then finally we calculate the Sharpe values using this explainer. So explainer acts as an intermediate to give us the Sharpe values. And for calculating the Sharpe values, we just pass the X test. All right, and I think it should do the job. We'll maybe have a look at sharp values. All right. So if we see sharp values dot shape, as you can see, I mean, all of these, all right, I'll just, all of these have, I mean, exponential functions. So, I mean, plus 0.00, so absolute 7.83. So these are actually the magnitude of all the sharp values, or how important each feature was for a particular instance. So if we just see the shape of it, all right. So we have 102 cross 13. So this was actually same as our X test. So for all our testing samples and for all the features, it gives a value of the sharp. So how important was each feature was for a particular sample. So let's move ahead and see a force plot. So for seeing any of these plots, you need to, I mean, initialize the JS. So what this does is nothing but, I mean, starts the JS or the JavaScript for visualization purposes. So just consider this as a syntax and just go ahead with this. So after this, we can have sharp.force plot, and we give explainer expected value. So expected value is the base value which I was talking about. That is the average of all the predictions. And I'll give, so the sharp values, we have sharp values for all of them. So maybe I'll give sharp values of, say, which one? All the sharp values for the first, I mean, instance. And we need to pass the columns. So I'll just explain that in a moment once we have the plot ready. Yeah. So now we have the plot ready. So we have the base value as 24.22, and the output value for first would be 5.98. And these were the factors which actually pushed it down. And there was one, I think, the index, one or two, which actually were trying to push it back. So the arguments in this are the expected value, which is actually the base value. It is automatically calculated by the explainer. Then we pass the sharp values of any particular observation that we want. And we need to also pass a list of all the columns, which actually gives the name of all these features in order. That is why this is very important. So we can also see it for any others, say, I mean, say 10. And we can have a look that it would be different. I mean, looks very similar, but okay. Let's say the second, I mean, the last one. Yeah. So, I mean, this is definitely different than those. All right. Moving ahead to summary plot. So summary plot, as you know, gives how each of those is, each of the sharp values differs along with the feature values as well. So we need to write sharp.initJS whenever we want to visualize any plot. And these are fairly simple to code. We just give the sharp values, and we give the entire test data set, and yeah, we get the output. So this is like very, would be familiar. I just showed this on the presentation as well. I actually took it from here only. So this gives all the sharp values, I mean, all the features in decreasing order of their importance, as well as the varying sharp values along with the feature importance. And finally, if we want to look at the decision plot, so we just use sharp.initJS for the JavaScript library, and we'll use decision plot, wherein we'll pass the expected value, that's the base value. Then we pass all the sharp values, and we pass the list of all the columns. All right. So if you pass all the sharp values, we'll get, I mean, so all the observation in one graph, which you'll see. Yeah. So we'll get something of this sort. And if we pass, say, just maybe 10, so just the 10th observation, so we'll just show one single line. And these obviously vary along with each other. Say random number 78. I mean, it was different. So yeah, you can, I mean, see it one observation by one observation or all of them together as this. Yeah. So these obviously gives us a starting point of how actually the model came to a particular conclusion, even locally as well as globally. So yeah, that's about it from my part, I guess. After this, the only thing, I mean, this gives a starting point for us to think, and then we can use different explainers. So for in this example, I showed a tree explainer, but say for a linear model, we can use a linear explainer. And I mean, there are all sorts of explainer which you can definitely see in the Sharp documentation. And yeah, so that's it from my part. Thank you all. Thank you very much for being a part of this webinar and being such patient audiences. It was really great. And if you have any feedbacks or suggestions, or if you want to reach out to me, this is my contact info. And I'm open to any questions right now. Please shoot them in the chat right now. And for those who might be thinking of leaving, we have a webinar tomorrow as well, which is on the ethics of AI as well as the art of web scraping, which would be taken up by my co-campus ambassador Aviroop. He's great at it, so please join that as well. And if you like the webinar today, please spread the word so that this community grows. Yep, open for questions. Please shoot them up in the chats, and you will be able to see this recording later. Also, I mean, if you missed any part or you want to refer to some part, you can definitely look at it. So I'll just wait for any questions, if any. Yeah. So please feel free to ask any questions, any kind of advice which you had. All right. So thank you very much for sharing. All right. I would be sharing the links for my Google Colab notebooks. I mean, I can definitely share them here as well. So this was for the one which I just recently used, and for the previous one, I'll just use it. This is for the second part. So, I mean, you can definitely store them. So do you have a channel for the recordings of all your webinars? Yes, we do have. So, I mean, we have a BitGrit official channel on YouTube. And so you can definitely move over there and, I mean, get all these details. Could you please repeat what the tomorrow's webinar will be about? Yes, Sai, so tomorrow's webinar will be about ethics of AI and the art of web scraping. So, you know, I mean, any data which we get, it's not, I mean, only in the competitions we get data in a very structured format. Otherwise, we have to take out, I mean, scrape data from net and then give it. And the ethics of AI, which is very important. So yeah, link to the YouTube channel. So all right, I'll just, so I'm sure, I mean, someone from my team can help regarding that, and they'll post it up here on the chat. Don't worry about it. All right, thank you. Guys, any other questions? Completely all right. I would be more than happy to answer. Yep. So one of my friend Rhythm has shared the YouTube channel. That's bitgrit_global. So you can definitely head over there and check out all the videos of today's webinar as well, which we updated. Yes, sure, Abhimanyu. Any of you can contact me on LinkedIn for any doubts as well. Yep. So my friend Ritam has also shared the link for the YouTube channel. So anyone who wants to visit can use that to visit it, definitely. Yep. Once again, all of you, I would really like to thank all of you for being so patient and taking out time on a Saturday afternoon for this webinar. I hope you learned something from it. For any doubts, feedbacks, or suggestions, you can head out to me using my contact info. And I'm still available for, I mean, maybe some more time for your doubts if you have any.